to our Female Entrepreneurs Worldwide online mentoring session. And as you know, we have our project hashtag Ask You Anything, where you ask something and we answer. We connect experts in industries together with members. My name is Yamilette Cano, and I'm the founder of Ladder. I'm going to be your host again today. And please remember that we want this session to be interactive. We want to hear from you. So tap your questions in the chat box or raise your hand, make a movement so I can let you ask the question to our speaker. Today, hacks on how to grow users on a tech product. And Jodie Chan, she's currently the VP of Product and Growth at Notey Labs, a tech firm specializing in building SaaS platforms. In the past several years, she's helped take multiple software products from idea to market, including the most recently Chinify, a fast-growing platform helping websites load fast and fully in China. Outside the tech space, Jodie is also a singer-songwriter, and she recently released her latest album. So make sure that you check it out on Spotify and any other platforms, or if you see her on social media, please connect with her. So without further ado, as always, I want to welcome Jodie Chan here on our online space. Hashtag Ask You Anything. Hi, Jodie, how are you?
Hi, Yamilette. Thank you so much for having me here today, and lovely to meet the people here on this chat.
Perfect, perfect. Here today, I see we have Rachel, Emily, Irsa, and Samuel, obviously from the Few team connecting with us. But later on, if you haven't had the chance to connect, you can also watch the replay. We want to start with, how did you get into this business, this industry of product development and growth? What's your background?
So actually, that's a very interesting question because it was quite a long-winded road that landed me here. My background actually in terms of studies is in communications, political science, and global health. So completely different field to tech. But the great thing about working in tech is that you'll actually realize there are a lot of people who come from different backgrounds who are able to bring that perspective to their company. And so I was very fortunate when I first, graduated from university, someone handpicked me to join their tech company, and I've been in tech ever since then.
Wow, that's such a different path. But this is to show to our entrepreneurs that we can study something or be passionate about something else and always pivot and change. I guess it's the thing that happens nowadays, and who has success over those who haven't had success because they haven't changed or adapted or be agile to what the opportunities are there.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What does it mean to be a VP for product and growth? Can you tell us more about what do you do? Like, how does your day looks like?
Sure. So the thing about tech companies, or at least the ones that I've worked with, and actually the ones that say my peers and friends have worked in as well, is that you often find with smaller teams is actually a very horizontal and flat structure. And so this title is more or less to be able to communicate with the outside world what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and the areas that you might be in charge with. So for myself, when I'm working as VP of product and partnerships or growth, my role is primarily to actually check in day to day with our development team. So I get to, have the fortunate role of working very closely with our leadership and our co-founders to kind of roadmap the things that we want to develop for. I also often have to gather a lot of feedback from our users directly to kind of understand what kind of business pain points we want to address on a technological level. So when I'm VP of product, what it means is that I get to kind of hopefully bridge the demand for our product with the product features that we're able to supply on the technological front.
So then that means that you're still using your communication background because you have to talk to your customers on a daily basis, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Do you know that?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, that's one of my favorite parts about what I do is that when you talk to, say, an end customer, their language is very different and, in some ways very foreign to, say, talking about code or the products or the features that we're building. And it's actually quite a good puzzle that I get to kind of piece together with my team, because you're often trying to read beyond what someone is saying in terms of their pain points.
Okay.
So you really have to kind of have that level of empathy with the user. You really have to have a level of not taking their word for face value, but kind of understanding, okay, what are you actually trying to fix? What are you trying to address? And maybe what are some of the ways that we can make your life easier with our product?
It sounds to me that you also have to be very empathetical. You have to have that tactical empathy to properly listen and then deliver what they want without them telling you all the time, right?
Absolutely.
This turns my idea. A lot of us have these stereotypes. Oh, people who work in tech are all geeks and they don't like talking to people. So you're breaking that ideology from our dictionary perspective.
Thank you very much. And actually, it's, you think about it, you can build a product, but who's the one using it at the end of the day? It has to be a consumer. It doesn't mean very much unless it's of use to someone. And so whether that's something hardware like a chair, if there's no one sitting in the chair, is the chair very useful? I would question maybe not. So it's the same idea when it comes to a SaaS platform as well, or any technological product for that matter.
So what does it mean to work cross borders? Because I see that your company, you have access to a lot of places in the world, and you're building this worldly web content.
Absolutely. So globalization is actually a word that's thrown around so much, I would say, in the last 5 years or the last 10 years, right? Yes. And interestingly, what that has meant is that for a company to succeed in this sort of environment, you really have to understand what it means to understand your local environment, for one, obviously the place that you work in and the people that you work with, but whatever is local is no longer limited by physical location. And so, for example, Hong Kong is really interesting because we're in a very dynamic place where we get a lot of international companies who want to, say, enter China, or Chinese companies who want to leave the world, not leave their world, but so much go into a foreign market. And so Hong Kong is in this weird, interesting, multi-language, dynamic sort of environment. And being physically here kind of embodies what it means to be in the cross-border space. It means being able to bring different parties and different interests together in a collaborative manner. And so we're trying to do that with our tech products today.
Do you have any similarities across the team that you have to have a specific vision, mindset, or perhaps it has to do with the technical aspect, but what about that sentiment and almost like that? Do you know when you pick someone to work with you in a specific project or an idea, do you know how to pick those people that are going to give you a richer experience during the process? Because I assume that from idea to reality, it takes this process a few steps. So how do you pick the teammates to work with you?
I think what's really great is I get to work with a really, really strong but mighty team. And so there are definitely people on the technical front. And on the technical front, the biggest thing is being able to, obviously on a technical level, execute at a very high level, but also you have to be incredibly innovative, because oftentimes the products that we're building, especially in our team, in many ways is the first of its kind. Okay. And so there is the challenge of being first to market and having to navigate that space that doesn't have documentation on how to solve your problem, your technical issue. And so when I'm building a team, or actually working with our co-founders in working with this team, we tend to try to look for people who are self-starter, have that self-starter attitude, who's able to kind of run directive on their own initiatives, be able to ask questions up front, because that allows us to move a lot faster. We try to limit the bureaucracy that can kind of happen within our team members so we can focus on building the product fast. I myself, actually, I think what's been great for me is, having grown up in Hong Kong, but then studied abroad and come back to this place, you actually find that there are a lot of similarities no matter what markets you're in. People need products that make their life more efficient, more pleasurable. And generally that's true no matter whether you're working B2B, so business to business, or business to consumer. And so, remind me of my question if hopefully I answered that correctly, and feel free to correct me if I haven't. But
how can you choose the team? Because you mentioned to me backstage that you have 10 yes. teammates, but I don't know if you work with all of them all the time in every product development, or you have sub teams depending on the expertise or the quality of the personality and their ideology.
So our team can probably be broken up into engineering and non-engineering. I would probably separate those two. And actually, when obviously on the technical front, they need to be very technically capable, and that we kind of leave to our founder to find out. They actually put our developers through a series of different tests before they're hired into the company. So it's just to understand where they are in terms of the growth that they need to have and perhaps the role that they'd be more suited for. On the non-engineering front, it's a mix of different, let's just say, verticals, which include marketing and sales. We also have obviously strategy, which goes into the investment space. And then there's growth. Generally, everyone is working towards growth of the company. So whether it's growth on the technical front of the product and or growth on the marketing and user acquisition front. But just a fun fact to kind of supplement that question, we actually adopt something called a stand-up meeting every single morning.
Sure.
And so it's really important for all members of this small but mighty team to know exactly what each other is working on so that we can kind of push towards that same North Star metric or that goal together, even if we don't understand all the details or nuances of each specific role.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a very inclusive environment and people are taken into consideration of their ideas. But what are the steps to creating a product in the SaaS space or in the tech space? Are there any specific steps that we perhaps or any entrepreneur has to take into consideration when they're going to venture into this industry?
Well, for one, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So I think in this interesting time where tech is so, let's just say, used as a term very often, you might hear terms left and right. Okay, we'll talk about blockchain, we'll talk about fintech, we'll hear about prop tech, we'll hear about martech. Basically, everything is tech, right? And so for entrepreneurs, generally something that I've probably picked up from my experience, and I can only speak for myself, is that it's very important to evaluate what else is available already, because there is something about, actually, sometimes it's great from a tech perspective to take something that's already been built, but to build it better. Oftentimes being a first to market is not always advantageous because you really have to educate the market onto something that you're delivering, versus if you are original and take something that exists to be better, the market already knows what you're doing. And so that might actually be a stepping stone. And so I would probably encourage people who are considering going into the tech space to really look at the companies that exist and are successful right now, and then kind of see where they might fit in that ecosystem or who they might collaborate with, because there is definitely strength in numbers and collaboration.
Know your competitors, but also your community.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we mentioned that you have a new product, Chinafy. So yes. How was this baby born? What were the steps? How did your team or yourself came with the idea of creating this product?
Sure. So actually before Chinafy came to being, or before Chinafy was born, we were actually doing a number of different custom enterprise solutions for companies who are already in the multi-language space. So they are basically really large companies. I might not disclose their names here, but really large companies who had to service people outside of Hong Kong, within Hong Kong, and within China as well. And so one of the first questions that kept coming up was, what about China? How do we handle these difficulties that we have entering the Chinese market? It's not just a language issue. The technology that they use is different. The platforms they use are different. And so this kind of sort of sat with the team on our side for quite some time, and we realized actually we better research into this demand and this sort of pain point that companies have. And so Chinafy was kind of born out of that, by realizing that there was a pain point when it comes to global companies trying to enter China, and that there may be some technological solution that we could create to kind of streamline and enable that process. So Chinafy, I'll just give a bit of background for our listeners here today, is a platform-based solution that helps websites load fast and fully in China. I don't know if people here are aware, but actually most websites don't work in China. So what happens is that they take often 30 to 50 seconds to load and maybe even timeout. And then worst of all is you actually are missing certain pieces of content on that page. So you might be missing videos, you might be missing fonts, forms, etc. So you can put all this effort into your marketing and branding assets from a global standpoint, but then it's sort of lost in China. And so what we're able to do now is basically take a website that's not blocked for, let's just say, legal reasons, that take a website and make it load as if it were a global website elsewhere, but make it work for China.
But do you lose these funds or videos and stuff because of the restrictions, or is there any other reason?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And actually, you guys might be more expert than a lot of the companies we work with by the end of this session. But the issues actually kind of are broken down into two portions. So first, it has to do with the code on a website. So to your question, there are certain pieces of code or resources, sorry, that are blocked in China. So for example, YouTube is blocked in China, Vimeo is blocked in China, Google fonts are blocked in China. And so the content of those videos actually might not be censored, so to speak, but because of the medium that they're delivered in, they actually are blocked in China. And so, yes, there are definitely resources that are blocked in China, but there are also resources that are slow in China. So when you build a website, you actually, might have images that are hosted with a service provider somewhere. And that service provider, when trying to retrieve and send those images for delivery in China, actually take a very long time to make that trip. And so it's a combination of resources that are blocked, to your point, for restrictive reasons. And then there are resources that are slow. And then it's just an infrastructure issue where basically the infrastructure you use to set up a website outside of China is different to the one you need for China.
Okay. This is my personal question.
Yeah.
And what about language? Does that make a difference if I have only a English language website versus a bilingual or a fully Chinese website?
Sure. So actually, it really depends on the company's objective to actually have that website load in China, because when a website is visited from China, the visitor might be speaking English, Chinese, French, etc. It's just whoever is visiting from China. So we always actually encourage people to develop for multiple markets if their audience could be from multiple markets. And that includes absolutely language. So obviously, if you have the resources, definitely do a multi-language website. If you don't have the resources, well, a presence is better than none. We'll say it that way.
But would it be better to have a presence in Chinese or in English?
I would say both, actually. I would say having it in both, because search engines are able to basically identify the language that your site is in if it's built well. And so being multi-language is just able to reach the audience a bit better because we don't know who they might be or what language they might prefer.
Okay. These are some of the challenges you're mentioning, perhaps, of having a SaaS product or developing a SaaS product. Are there any other challenges that you want to share with our audience? And second part would be, what are the advantages? I know perhaps accessibility, scalability, the data security, any more challenges and advantages of SaaS products?
Absolutely. So, just to define, SaaS products are basically software as a service. And so generally when comparing SaaS to an alternative, I think the best contrasting way to do that is by comparing it to a brick and mortar store. When you say sell a product, let's just say I'm selling, a coffee mug, for example. When it's outside of a SaaS product, you're actually selling oftentimes one-to-one. You're able to reach one person at a time or two people at a time, and maybe at most 10 people who are in your store. When you work with a SaaS product, what you're doing is adding that to scale. So I can reach 100 people at a time, 1,000 people at a time, 10,000 people at a time. And so one of the not to overuse this, but we always ask, how can we make this 100x? How can we make this 100 times more effective for someone? And how can we reach 100 times more people with our product? And that's to create something that is basically addresses a pain point. For one, it's very important to address the pain point so that there is demand for it. But the second part is obviously, okay, how do we remove the friction that a user might have to signing up for the platform? How do we encourage them and educate them through the marketing funnel so that when they make their purchase, it's a smooth process? So, the challenges of a SaaS product versus the advantages is that not everything maybe is applicable and good for a SaaS product. Some things might be more suitable to be a SaaS versus others in terms of how large the demand is. But I would definitely say that the advantages of a SaaS product, I'm biased, but the advantages definitely outweigh the challenges to being a SaaS platform.
how do I know as an entrepreneur whether to go one direction or the other? Are there any specific points that I have to think about before defining? Let's say I'm a new entrepreneur in this space, before defining, do I go SaaS or do I don't?
That's a very good question. And I wish I had the answer so I can once again only speak for myself, not to represent the entire tech community. But I think once again, this goes back into research. So knowing that building any sort of tech platform takes a lot of time and investment and resources and expertise in that field. So if you are to lead an entire project, make sure that you're very well versed with that field. So for example, I wouldn't claim to be an expert in, let's just say, F&B as a random industry, right? And so I wouldn't probably be the best person to lead a project building a tech platform or otherwise for the F&B industry, because I just don't understand those pain points.
Yeah.
So I would say research heavily into what market you're looking into. Once again, seeing what platforms or what technologies are available there. And then ask yourself, as a potential user of this, does it make your life easier to be using something that's technological or not? Because one thing, for example, I think this is a good not analogy, but example of a consideration that people should have is people always say, you should create an app, you should create an app, you should create an app. But you think about what's on your phone and it's very limited real estate. So there's actually a lot of friction and a lot of consideration a user has before they want to download an app. So the question I would ask someone who's asked me this before is the app really the best way, whether it's done as an ego standpoint because it's cool to have an app, or is it really what is needed and demanded from the market? Or is it sufficient to have a website that works on both web and mobile? Or is it better to actually just start as a small community, gathering those data points and then seeing whether tech actually is even the best way to move this forward?
Oh, that's such a great advice, because as you were saying in the very beginning, tech is just the new word. Everybody's feeling the buzz about tech and we all want to go tech, and may not be the best solution for everyone. So it's important to understand that.
Absolutely.
Do you have any exciting customers, projects that you want to share with us, or any trends, anything exciting around the industry?
Yeah, actually, it's been a very, very exciting time for our company and perhaps a lot of different SaaS platforms, because so many companies are digitalizing right now. They're almost forced to, and not happily sometimes, to move a lot of things online. So one example of that is we've been working with a lot of universities and schools, because obviously a lot of international students have been sent back home, say if they were in China or based in China, they've been sent back home. And now schools are kind of struggling and forced to adapt and actually have their programs online for international students to be able to communicate through video platforms like Zoom, Vimeo, YouTube, etc. And so we've been actually seeing an increased trend towards accelerated digitalization, I would say. So basically trying to find tools to enable people that would do things normally offline to do it online and make it as rich of an experience. So similarly, I think event platforms are another big trend that we're seeing. A lot of different events are just being moved online. What I would say from my observation is that I think there will be because there's such a saturated market sometimes of digital platforms, it will be a big difference if a platform is able to still retain and highlight the human elements of what they help with. So for example, I would think with some of the event platforms, it's good to acknowledge that it might not completely replace offline events. So the moment that, let's just say, hopefully borders open, people will still have offline events and it will still be an enriching experience. But for those platforms to thrive, my guess is that it would have to complement that human experience, not to replace it. And I think that's true with any sort of tech platform. It should never seek to entirely replace, I think, the human experience or the value in that, but to enhance it or to complement it.
That's so true, because I know a lot of people are always afraid, especially when they hear AI, they think about the transformers coming and taking their jobs or taking on the world. So as you're saying, it's all about understanding how these things are going to help us and how can they be complementing, because reality is that the human touch is super important. But going back to all of these terms, perhaps are quite difficult for some people, especially those that we are not in the tech industry, to understand. And another of the term aside from Sas that I've been hearing around is EU and UX design. Can you give us the difference between these two, and how are these important in development of SaaS products?
Sure. So I would not claim to be a UI UX expert, as I've kind of said here, but from our experience, what I would say is that, well, UI is user interface. So UI design would be user interface design versus UX, which is user experience design. And both those things are very critical to any development of any product. And so you hear that term flown around very often because with user experience design is basically trying to, from my interpretation, is how to make that a more pleasant experience for the user, whether it's going through your platform or going through an event. So in the context of a platform, let's just say the user experience, is it frustrating for me to sign on? And that is very intricately tied with UI as well, because does the interface make it very complex or confusing for the user to sign on? Is it frustrating? Is it pleasant? Is it joyful even? And so in both those UI and UX, I think one of the terms that you actually hear a lot in the tech space is, does it delight your user? So does the user experience delight your user, and does the user interface delight the user? And it gets completely geeky here, but sometimes I'll land on a website and I'm like, wow, the experience is just stunning, beautiful, enjoyable, and it brings me joy.
See, even my brain, I mix them up, EU, UI, just still, but it's so good that you clarify that, because knowing exactly what do they mean, it would be also easier for us to embrace it.
Absolutely.
Knowledge, very, very important. And we're
Absolutely.
also keep on talking about customer experience. You just said that. Oh, am I delighted? Is it frustrated? How do you make sure that your team delivers with the highest quality, but also with this delightful experience of your products?
I think the challenge sometimes with a scalable solution, any scalable solution, is that you're trying to make something as applicable to every single customer, but also global in its applicability. And so when that happens, is that there will inevitably be a portion of people who are upset by the way you do things. And then at that point, you really have to decide, okay, do I change this element of my product to then make them happier, or for the greater good, in some respects, keep certain features and things in place? And so honestly, the way we do it is just like, I would say, have very strong customer service and success people who help to educate your customer, who help to give them the best possible success with your product as possible. And so if you don't mind re-asking your question, whether I could be very precise with how I answer that.
How do you manage your team in order for them to be able to deliver the delightfulness of the products, or the greatest experience they can have?
So actually, one of the greatest things was when we have our stand-up meeting, I love to share, and actually all of our team loves to share some sort of any wins that we have. So really good customer feedback is kind of a pat on the shoulder, says, okay, keep things up in this direction, and maybe explore how else you can build that further into the product. At the same time, we also share very flat in terms of the complaints that we might receive. And so that definitely helps to have the team super aligned, and aim for that quality of product, which sometimes is very subjective as a mark. But if we look at metrics, we can see it by the conversion rates that we're seeing. We can look at, in terms of the website, we can look at the traffic, how many people access the website, how many people are engaged, what points do they leave the product. And I think sometimes when people don't tell us directly, we look at these metrics to get a good sense.
Okay, it does sound challenging, because as you were saying, and especially with the cross-border collaboration or building of products, some people may like something here in Asia or this side of the world, whilst perhaps in the West, we don't want that. So how can you balance our background, our history, our culture, because that affects that customer experience?
Absolutely. So at least in terms of our product, we don't necessarily impact the content of the work, the websites that we optimize, so to speak. So the content is still completely, based on the customer. But what I would say is, I think it's always keep a very open mind and keep an open communication channel, and be as upfront as you can in terms of the gaps of what, say, our technology can fulfill and what it cannot fulfill. And so, culture is constantly evolving, communication channels are constantly evolving. And so we have to admit that our technology also has to constantly evolve and adapt and do our best to, let's just say, serve the right customers and make sure that it's a mutually beneficial and joyful relationship.
Do you have any stories that you can share or you would like to share with us where something wasn't going very well? Perhaps the product that you thought it was going to be a hit, then it comes out to the market and it wasn't, but you turn it around into a successful ending. Do you have any stories like that?
So, that's a very good question. I like that you threw that in my direction. I would say, in a very optimistic way, I believe we were able to see not the failures of a lot of companies, but kind of see their shortcomings and learn from their failures. So a very big problem is when you build a product without any sort of user feedback, it's bound to fail to some regard because you're building them based on your assumptions. So what we try to do is we kind of, when we have an idea, we kind of slowly test the market. We ask a few people who might be potential customers, what are your pain points? Does this address it? Basically kind of get a good sense before we even build anything, just to get some user feedback. And then we start bringing on something called, beta users. So beta users can help test our product, give us feedback, and help us refine the right direction before we throw 150% resources behind it. And then after that fact, we then go to market because we already know there's a group of people who are excited to use it and super loyal and able to give us feedback. And then there are potentially new people who can give us even more feedback to make that product better. And so I would say, at least in our case, we try to pivot quite fast and be agile in terms of reacting to the demands of the market.
That sounds like a great strategy, and it
in
also
life in
sounds
general,
like it has been successful too for your side. That's great. Know that entrepreneurs, is important to us for feedback. We are sometimes very afraid of asking, but what's the worst that could happen? People don't want to give you the feedback, and that's it. You go and ask someone else.
Totally fine, and that's totally fine.
Is this connected also to your passion, the way that you write your songs? Now, as I said in the beginning, you recently released a new album. How is this connected to your day job? Were you first a singer-songwriter, or you turned tech expert? And then tell us a little bit about this part of your life.
Absolutely. So I think everybody is quite multifaceted, and I'm sure you have a lot of interests on the side, and you might call them side hustles or side gigs. But for myself, I think I've always been a very people-oriented person. So you've kind of asked me how that applies to tech. And so in terms of tech, it's very important to empathize with your users. So I get to use that element of it. I also get to be very creative with my team to develop new ideas, new products. And so similarly, when it comes to music, which is something I've always grown up with, I used to perform a lot growing up. I have those same traits put to use. So a lot of my songs are very story-based in terms of, it's just writing about the people I meet and the stories that they tell me. And so I'm able to kind of put that into song, and I get to be quite creative with piecing that together. And then I think one interesting element that I recently discovered is very similar in how I work in tech and how I work in my own music is the growth element. So because I'm actually self-distributing to some degree my own music, I would say it's an independent record label of my my own doing. I always try to look for different ways to grow. And so the metrics might be different. It might not be users, but in the case of music, it'd be listeners. Yeah. And so how to reach different listeners in different markets, kind of look into the data about what people like, what people don't like, what my age demographics are. I mean, very randomly, I have people in Germany and Sweden and Buffalo, New York, who are listening to my music, and I've never met any of them. And so it tells me that maybe my market might not be immediately in Hong Kong, and that's good feedback for me as well. So yeah, to your question, empathy, creativity, and growth.
This is so funny because I remember one night we were discussing about this, and you were saying, I have all these listeners in Buffalo and I don't know how they came across my music. And say, well, you just go for it and exploit that avenue, which Absolutely. Sounds great. And sounds very similar to what you're doing also with your work in tech.
Yeah, I think I'm still the same person. I'm just applying it in different ways.
And you also sound and look very passionate about your job and anything that you decide to take on in your life. As a lady, and I don't want to sound stereotypical, but we know that this discourse about girls being in the STEM, in the STEM avenues or working in tech is still not very open. We don't have that many conversations of how can women be empowered in these industries. What would you like to hear or listen more about when it comes to talking about girls being in the STEM avenue and journey? How can we help them to get into these industries?
I actually would break it down by how we communicate to different generations, because I went to a talk where we were talking about, so I was asked, what is feminism? I was asked about what is it like to be a female in this industry? And one of the very good questions that was raised, and this is a bit controversial, is, well, then should I hire someone just because they're a woman, or should I hire them because of what they're able to do? And then my answer to that question was, at the end of the day, you should, still be hiring people based on their ability to perform, or the ability to achieve what your job scope is. So if you were to kind of read without gender as two different resumes and be able to compare them, okay, you should pick the one who's most suitable for the role. But my question then was, if you cannot find women, so to speak, who are able to fulfill that roles, I think one should ask why. Is it earlier in the education system that they weren't given the opportunities to do so? Because you have women and men performing at super high levels in every single industry nowadays. But the barriers to entry are so much higher for women. And the question goes to why, and at what stage do those barriers start? And so I think that's something that I would love to see maybe 10 years down the line. When I talk to someone in school, they'd be like, oh, it doesn't matter if I'm a girl. I could be this, I could be that, etc. It's not even a conversation. And they think that you're strange for even asking that question. I would love to see that.
Yeah, me too. We want to see more girls in the science and maths and tech and everything related to STEM. And you're right, it starts with education and how our teachers are telling us that this could be possible. It's not only for one gender or the other, it's for everyone that has that ability.
Yeah, and actually maybe this is unique, and maybe this has also crafted my role right now, is my sister's was a computer science major. She works at Microsoft now in the US. My mom is in a tech role for a law firm in Hong Kong as well. I'm an international law firm. And so maybe being able to see these role models also made it very easy for me to say, yeah, why not work in tech? I see the great possibilities and the exciting things it could do.
Especially because you didn't study anything related to tech. So that's very interesting how you jump from one to the other. Yeah. Before I open the floor to any questions, I want to ask you, are there any other tips, any other trends, or a piece of advice that you want to tell our entrepreneurs today when it comes to anything tech related, product development in the tech space, or SaaS, as we were talking about, SaaS, or it doesn't have to be SaaS specifically, but anything related to the tech space that you want to leave us with?
I think be shameless in asking questions. So ask people who just generally reach out to people, and what's the worst that could happen? They just don't answer you, or they ignore you, or they say something rude, which has also happened. But what I think is, what I find, maybe this is a plug for this sort of platform, is seriously, if you have any questions, I always ask anybody who's been to any of the talks I might have been to, just to ask me a question, ask me directly if you're curious. There's nothing too dumb. Everyone's at different stages of their learning, and the more questions you ask, the more well-informed you'll be. And so I think that's the biggest tip I try to take myself in doing in any sort of, in life in general.
Yeah. Being shameless. I love that.
Yeah, be shameless.
It's a great branding. And I said I was going to, that was my last question, but actually it came to my mind. Today, in this day and age, there's so many of these tech events. We used to have them before live, big events like the Web Summit and Rise here. Mm-hmm. And now they're all around the world online. Is it really helpful for us to go to these events to learn more about tech? Is it some of them have so much content. I don't know if we can handle that much content, but are there any tips when we decide to go this type of events to get the most out of them?
Time is a very precious thing. And I feel like with every year that passes, and maybe even COVID, made people reassess how they spend their time. And so I would say whenever you go to these events, do absolutely go, but go with an objective and think ahead of a time what your objective is. Because otherwise you could end up talking with people about, the weather, and that might not be the best use of your time, because other people might be there without an objective too. And so when you're able to show up to an event and be very clear about what you want, what you're looking for, what you're asking, you'll get a lot more out of that in terms of that event. And I think at least, even the events we go to, sometimes they have people, once again, it goes back to research, but find out who is talking at the events and people you do want to connect with. And you might be surprised by what they can offer. And it's okay if you don't go to every single one. There might be events that just feel very similar to one another. And so select them, but go with an objective every time.
Precious time, select your energy, and obviously the connections that you want to grow, because that also takes a lot of research, emotion, and heart. I have Absolutely. Rachel directly from Thailand. She raised her hand, so that means that she wants to ask a question directly to you, Jodie. So I let it to
feel free
to her.
Perfect. Hi, Jodie. Thank you so much for all the super interesting information.
Thank you.
It's great hearing your experiences. My question is kind of more directed to user interface. So what have been some of the biggest challenges that you and your team have had in developing successful and strong user interfaces with more and more screen sizes being developed? I mean, you've got the smartphone with like the tiny screens, the big screens, you've got tablets, desktop computers, laptops. So what have been some of the biggest challenges with that?
So, I mean, I can speak to at least specific to our product, because it really does differ product to product. But for example, our website, we use something called responsive design. And so that's designed to, basically you design one design for your website, and it's responsive, meaning that depending on the screen size, it will actually adapt itself. And this is kind of so far the latest in terms of what we've used in terms of practices and best practices. And the other thing is user interface considerations might be, what is your product for? So for example, our current product, Chinafy, in terms of management, is majority managed by businesses. And so our end customer is a business, and they'll often have to use a desktop in order to manage, let's just say, the Chinafy product. And so we're not exactly designing for a mobile application, so to speak, because it doesn't really add to the experience, and it's not what has been asked of us so far. And so the challenges is obviously, I would say the challenge can be to make those decisions when you change certain features on the website or desktop versus not changing them, and kind of adapting and educating the user to learn how to use them.
For sure,
Making that call is very difficult.
Yeah. And there's so many, I mean, platforms, obviously you can code things from scratch, but there's so many platforms that allow you to build these things where the code's already implemented. So yeah, super interesting and definitely difficult decisions to make.
Yeah, and the good thing is, depending on how many resources you have, it's always okay to change and pivot if need be.
Definitely. Perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And thanks for, being so pleasant and happy and joyful during the whole presentation. I could see your little icon face up the top, and it was good feedback. I miss the human feedback in human events.
Yes. Yeah, I know. Me too. It'll be nice once we get back there, but your presentation made it easy to be engaged and happy through the whole presentation. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Jodie, Rachel, she's always smiling and she's always connecting with us and asking questions, which, as you say, I, as a host, I really, really appreciate it. I'm sure also the speakers, it makes you feel alive when we can see their faces. What's next with Notey Labs and your role? What would be the next adventure?
I see us continuing to build and scale Chinafy. We've had some really exciting developments in terms of partnerships with really large companies like Alibaba Cloud, Microsoft, and soon Amazon Web Services and things like that. And so for us, we just want to continue building these partnerships. Like I mentioned, there is power in numbers. And so being able to scale the product, I think, would be our biggest focus, I think, in the near and long term.
What's the important thing for an entrepreneur that would want to get in touch with you and your team to grow their product and to perhaps launch their product in China? What do they need to know before they reach out to you?
Actually, we try to make the process super easy. So at least with Chinafy, all we need is actually the website URL. and we take care of all the technical work involved. And at the very end, they just make some quick update to their DNS, which is, where they manage their website. And then that's pretty much it. So they don't really need to prepare much other than check out our website. If they have specific questions, I mean, feel free to leave my email so that someone can reach out directly to me if they have anything specific to Notey or otherwise. Feel free to just ask me. I do encourage it, as I mentioned before. And yeah, in terms of preparation, just be open-minded about the platforms out there. Be suspicious as well, because there are a lot. But things that are good will prove itself to be good in the long run.
Normally, how long does the process take? I guess it depends on the product and the client you're working with, but do you have like a time frame?
For Chinafy, our average time is Chinafy, right? You're asking about the product. It's about 1.5 to 2 weeks. So it's relatively fast.
Okay. Well, that's very fast. So entrepreneurs out there, if you want to create a new SaaS product and go to Chinafy, please connect with Jodie. And what about your music career? What's next? What's exciting? I know you had for this latest album, you have this wonderful photo shoot. Please go on Spotify and listen to Jodie's creation. But what's next? How are you going to grow this business?
I've been very fortunate. I actually don't really know how this came to be, but I was managed to list on an official Hong Kong Spotify editorial playlist. Someone discovered me from the Hong Kong side, and I've been asked to be part of several performances and live events in the limited capacity that we can have in Hong Kong. So for me, I'll probably continue to do more performances around Hong Kong where I can, maybe some live streams as well with people, and then continue to create and record music. So I have a ton of music in the bag, and now the next step is just to produce them and collaborate with very talented people here in Hong Kong.
Oh, well, that's exciting. I love it. And she has great music.
Thank you so much.
Firsthand.
It's true. You have heard a lot of it firsthand. It's true.
I want to change a little bit the dynamic and the interactions here. Normally, I ask the questions, you answer, or someone from the audience asks the question and then you answer. If there's no other questions from the floor, I want you to ask a question to our floor in terms of, I don't know, what do they have to think about when it comes to SaaS products or getting into this space? Is there anything that when someone comes to you for mentorship, how do you direct them in order to get to the right route or path?
Well, I think the first question I normally ask is, how did you come up with this idea? So pretty much how you asked and started this interview is, where did this idea come from? What are the data points that you've had? Maybe even a bit of statistics into how large the market size is, and maybe where you get a sense of the demand. I would probably just ask a bunch of these guiding questions. Obviously, what field are you in? Who are the major players there? Just to get a better sense of what you'd be entering and what you'd be working with. And another question I would definitely ask is, who's on your team? Okay. Because it's definitely, at the end of the day, I would say that the success of this product is because of the success of this team and how well we work together, and obviously the technical muscle that's behind this team. And so I would probably ask, who are you working with and why did you select them? And it better not just be because they're really good friends.
That's true. I'm sure they have to have some technical expertise back there.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
You cannot go around without having a tech expert. Yeah, I don't think this is a journey that you can just wing it.
You'd be surprised. Surprised. I've come across people who definitely don't have that background or technical expertise who do want to start their own tech product. So it's about finding the right partners and maybe the right advisory.
So if I'm not a tech expert, I can still venture into this arena.
Yeah, just find some good partners to work with you. I would say everyone's got their different strengths. And so it's being able to maximize those strengths and be able to cover those weaknesses.
Super. Well, if there's anybody else I'm seeing here, people on the floor again, I see Rachel's face, but if Anna, Ines, and Anna, they're the co-founders of Female Entrepreneurs Worldwide. They're always with us some way or the other. So thank you for putting together these sessions for us to learn more about different topics. And I know that further along the year, we're going to have more and more and more for us to learn and to connect, especially. Emily, thank you very much. Parul, thank you for connecting, and obviously Samuel to help us with the logistics of this event. If there are not any other questions, I will close the floor today. And thank you again, Jodie, for being with us.
And thank you, Yamilette, for hosting. It was a pleasure.
A pleasure. Oh, Rachel is saying claps. Thank you again. See you next time. Take care.
Thank you guys. Bye-bye. Take care.